and it looks like it's happening on schedule, and every month things get stronger. There are 3 major events the community is putting on this year: Rare Evo, the CNFT Con down in Las Vegas, and then the foundation's putting on the annual summit in Dubai. One is in end of August, one is in end of September, and then one is in November. Each of these are checkpoints to have a lot of discussions about the specifics, and checkpoints also drive a lot of membership and get a lot of really good people into the organization. And as an MBO, eventually members pay fees to the MBO, and you have a free tier and a paid tier, and my hope is also a merit tier. By the way, that was one of the biggest areas of discontent with the Linux Foundation, was that they didn't want to have a merit-based membership tier. When we were in discussions of whether Cardano could be a part of that foundation as its own product or needed its own MBO, I really think if people are doing great work, they shouldn't also have to pay for the privilege to be on committees or other things like that. They earned that right, and they proved it to the community by the code they've written, the contributions they've made. So the MBO becomes self-sufficient, and the government of Cardano can choose to give it more resources, or fund alternative MBOs, or diversify funding to have multiple MBOs that do very specific things. For example, there could be MBOs that are, this one is very engineering oriented and roadmap oriented. There could be MBOs that are related to adoption and marketing, whose day job it is to go and get 10 million or 100 million people to come into Cardano. The people who run the government of Cardano, of which there will be thousands as it evolves, are the ones who are going to make that decision on a year-by-year basis. And they don't just make it, they put money behind it. They have access to the Cardano treasury, which is quite large, a lot of resources. But just because it's large doesn't mean it's a good idea to just throw it away. You have to have good institutions that have a proven track record, accountability, and good governance structures and audit structures in order to know that that's going to do the job. And that's why you set these things up as a try before you buy, as part of a handoff from the tripartite to the broader community. There's some initial funding that gets put into these things to get them running and some transitions. And then the government makes a final call of whether they think that that's useful or they want to move to something else. And that's okay, because they make the decision for everyone with the consent of everybody, as opposed to a small group of people deciding that they know better than everybody else. This is the point of decentralization and inclusion. You'd leave no person behind, and you work very hard to maximize freedom. By having implementation agnostic blueprints, at any given moment, any person can create a competing client and prove to the rest of the ecosystem that that competing client is just as good as the other ones, and it's safe to use. At any given time, anybody can get Git credentials. They just have to prove that they have the knowledge required according to some objective standards. What are those standards? Well, Intersect can set that, not me. We can just give recommendations and put them over the fence. But ultimately, once they've been set, then everybody has to adhere to that standard and prove that they're deserving of it. This is how you don't develop a dev cult where these elite people decide as gatekeepers who's also elite and exclude anybody they disagree with. And thus you have forks in the code. It's an open system. So it's trust but verify. So anybody can build it, but they have to prove that it adheres to an open standard. Anybody can write an open standard, but this open standard has to be accepted. Anybody can contribute, but they have to prove before they get credentials that they're at a certain baseline of understanding of how the protocol works, how the structure of the open source project is, how to read the specifications, and for the relevant code base that they're adhering to. So Haskell is an example, but you could have dozens of these types of things. And those proofs are completely open. Now, here's the really cool thing. This actually doesn't require real life human identity. And talk about a revolution in decentralization. Let's say there's a rock star developer. You can associate with a DID, a decentralized identifier, a credential. But that DID could be McLovin, just an alias on the internet. You don't actually know who it is, but you can verify that credential. So this is super inclusive because it does not require a geography, a language, or a real life human identity. You can use aliases, but there's still trust because that alias is associated with a proof of merit. Work has been done. And that's what openness and inclusion is. You don't require people to compromise their privacy in order to be part of the conversation. This same concept of aliasing and credentials, because you can pay member fees when member fees eventually come to intersect with ADA. Well, doesn't that mean that you can serve on a working group as an alias and you don't actually have to be a real life human? That's pretty cool if you think about that. So basically, it's an open, completely inclusive system. People get to decide what they want to work on, how close they want to be to it, whether they want to have a real life human identity or an alias, and they prove to the system that they have merit. Once it's been proven in an objective, open way, then they can have a great voice in a roadmap that can then be ratified by others. Now, what if you disagree with all of this and you think all of this is nuts and you think it should go in a radically different way? Well, that's the point of something like SIP 1694, because you can have an alt vision and you can say, you know what? Vote for that. And if the government of Cardano says this alt vision is the way to go and all of this is nonsense, well, guess what? The alternate vision wins. This is all open source code in these repos. This protocol is completely open source. It's under the Apache 2 license. So what you can do is fork it, put it into the alternate vision, and obviously if the government's approving that, it's probably going to put money into that as well. So it can throw a bunch of ADA into that. And then this structure no longer has any legitimacy. And so probably the members will move over to the alternate structure. But I think there's a lot of reason behind this, and it's a good thing to try throughout all of 2024 as things move over and people scale up. And together as one community, we're going to learn a hell of a lot about it. And we now have the structures in place to use this in a responsible way. And then we can always be thinking about how do we do better? How do we add more? How do we move from minimum viable governance 1 to 2? How do we right size our expectations? And how do we, as one group, handle the product function? I often get asked who's the product manager of Cardano, and it's not a person, it's us. Every single holder of ADA, every single person contributing to the project has something to say about the backlog, and they all matter. And so it's really important to build a structure where all of those comments can go into one place. And that's what gives you decentralization and inclusion and allows you to have the most open system. And that's what's going to define us. So it's been the work of my life, about 10 years to get to this point, and I'm proud of everything we've done. But this is the most significant event of the project's history, and the one that if we get right, it will make Cardano something that we measure its durability, not in terms of years, but centuries. Something that's going to be around for a long time. And it's something that is impossible to stop because you have 3 million people who are engaged in the interest of thousands of commercial entities coming together. And they have a way of sorting all these things out without relying upon a particular jurisdiction or gatekeeper. And the system is self-reinforcing and resilient enough to remove barriers. So if there are problems in the system, it has a way of navigating around them. And there's nuclear options like a completely alternative vision that can be pivoted to in the event that the structures have become bureaucratic and ossified. In other words, you can fire the people that are really getting in the way. I live in America, and we can't do that. We can't get rid of our president because he's unpopular. We can't get rid of 90-year-old senators with dementia. We just look at these people and ask ourselves, why is it such an amazing, rich, and powerful country is led by people that are so bad and are so blatantly against the goodwill of our country? It's because the governing system, the operating model, was exclusive, and it was built by a small club for a small club, and it created the fantasy of choice, the fantasy of democracy. If this is my life's work and what will ultimately define whether I did good work or bad work, and we did good work and bad work together, It's going to come down to, did we build a system that can heal itself? And if there are problems, correct those problems? Or did we build a system to perpetuate the systems that we inherited? And if it's the latter, we failed. I think what we have here is a beautiful framework for getting us to an inclusive, diverse, and decentralized ecosystem that still moves quickly with quality and promotes openness for everybody, meaning that you can build onto it and we can move forward. Now, there will be problems, there will be critics. There's plenty of people that are going to say certain parts don't meet their expectations or they want a certain sacred thing to be preserved. And that's the point of debate. And that's why you have to have a consent engine. You have to have a voting layer inside the system because at some point you have to make a decision.